"Mr. Harding, your blood pressure is dangerously high, and you're showing worrying neurological symptoms. You need to go to the hospital right now," said the cleaning man, his voice a steady counterpoint to the chaotic shouting on the phone. David Harding, 58, owner of a tech empire worth $3 billion, a man who built his fortune on the premise of seeing the future, froze. He looked at Samuel Wilson, 45, a black man in a janitor's uniform, as if he had just spoken in a dead language. Samuel was holding a mop, having the audacity to give him medical advice. "Excuse me?" David laughed, a sharp, derisive sound, lowering his phone. "Are you giving me medical advice now? What's your background again? Advanced sanitation?" The sarcasm was a physical presence in the sleek, minimalist office on the 50th floor of the Harding Tech Tower. Samuel had just witnessed David struggle to type on his massive desk screen, his hands shaking and his thoughts clearly jumbled during a conference call. Symptoms he recognized instantly, but which all the young, ambitious executives present had completely ignored. "Sir, I'm not just—" Samuel began, but David cut him off with a growl. "You're nothing but a cleaner, Samuel. Go back to your chemicals and let me run my company in peace. And next time, clean in silence." What David didn't know was that Samuel Wilson had been a highly respected neurosurgeon for 18 years before losing everything in a professionally fabricated scandal. A brutal case of racial discrimination where his innovative surgical techniques were stolen and he was blamed for a patient's death he had no part in. The event forced him to take cleaning jobs just to survive. But his medical mind never stopped working. He had noticed the signs in David for weeks: the slowed coordination, the occasional slurred speech, the moments of disorientation that David dismissed as simple stress. All the symptoms pointed to a severe neurological condition that, if left untreated, could be fatal. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Harding," Samuel replied with an unsettling calm. "I'll keep doing my job." But while David returned to his multi-million-dollar calls, Samuel did something he would never expect. He began to discreetly document everything, every symptom, every episode, every moment when arrogance overtook David's survival instinct. David Harding thought he had complete control over his company and the people below him. What he didn't realize was that the man cleaning his office was holding a secret that could save his life. If only David would stop being so arrogant. As Samuel quietly organized his cleaning supplies, his trained eyes continued to observe. He knew exactly what was happening with David Harding. More importantly, he knew exactly what to do about it. If you've ever been underestimated because of your race or social status, you know that sometimes the best revenge is simply being right when everyone else is wrong. 3 days later, David Harding was worse, but his arrogance had tripled. During an executive board meeting, Samuel saw him confuse the names of his own directors and repeat the same question 3 times in 10 minutes. As Samuel discreetly approached to clear the conference table, he overheard fragments of the conversation that alarmed him. "David, are you okay? You seem a bit confused today," Jane Morrison, the CFO, murmured with genuine concern. "Confused?" David exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "I'm perfectly fine. Maybe you're just not keeping up with my thinking. I've always been 3 steps ahead of everyone." Samuel saw the subtle tremor in his left hand, the way he blinked repeatedly as if trying to focus his vision, progressive neurological symptoms he had seen countless times before during his tenure at Metropolitan Hospital. The scandal that ruined his career had begun 6 years ago when Samuel, then the head neurosurgeon, publicly questioned Dr. Vance's racially motivated approach to allocating beds and resources. He had documented that black patients with identical conditions were consistently placed in less ideal post-op recovery rooms than white patients. "Are you accusing a respected doctor of racism?" Hospital Director Dr. Julian asked during the disciplinary meeting. "Based on what scientific evidence?" "Based on 18 years of data and 300 pages of detailed documentation," Samuel replied, placing his meticulous research on the table. But the internal investigation was a sham. Dr. Vance was a personal friend of the CEO and a generous donor to the hospital. Instead of reviewing his evidence, they created an alternative narrative. Samuel was emotionally unstable and projecting personal issues of race onto medical practice. The final blow came when they discovered he had allegedly violated surgical protocols, fabricated allegations they could never prove, but which were enough to destroy his career. Within 6 months, he lost his license, his reputation, and any hope of ever working in the medical field again. "People like you always think the world owes you something," Dr. Vance had said on his last day with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe it's time to accept that some places just aren't for you." Now, 6 years later, cleaning the office of the most powerful man in the tech industry, Samuel felt a bitter irony. David Harding's company had just launched a new AI program for hospitals, one that Dr. Vance was using to make resource allocation decisions, the very system Samuel had questioned. "Are you still here?" David's sharp voice brought him back to the present. The meeting was over, and David was watching him with irritation. "How long does it take to clean a desk?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Harding. I was just being thorough." "Thorough?" David laughed dismissively. "You're a janitor, not a surgeon. Speed matters more than perfection in your line of work." Samuel nodded silently, but his trained eyes continued to register details. David's right pupil was slightly more dilated than his left. His verbal responses had a subtle delay. His fine motor coordination was clearly impaired. Classic signs of increased intracranial pressure. "And another thing," David continued, adjusting his tie with less precise movements than usual. "Next time you have the brilliant idea of giving me medical advice, remember that I pay some of the best doctors in the country. I don't need the opinion of someone who cleans toilets for a living." The casual cruelty of his words cut deep, but Samuel kept his expression neutral. He had learned to absorb humiliation without reacting, a skill developed over years of systematic discrimination. "I understand perfectly, sir," he replied, beginning to put away his cleaning supplies. But as he left the office, Samuel made a decision. That night, in his small apartment, he opened his laptop and began to type. Not a formal medical report. He no longer had the credentials for that. Instead, he began something different. A detailed, anonymous letter to David's wife, Seraphina Harding. Samuel had researched the Harding family extensively. Seraphina was a trained surgical nurse. Though she hadn't practiced in years, she would understand the medical terms and recognize the seriousness of the symptoms described. Each word was carefully chosen, each symptom documented with temporal precision, each observation backed up by specific behavioral evidence. He finished the letter at 3 a.m, reread it 5 times, and slipped it into an unmarked envelope. David Harding thought he had silenced another inferior person. What he didn't know was that he had just awakened something far more dangerous than anger. A trained neurosurgeon with a mission to save lives, even when those lives belonged to people who despised him. As Samuel sealed the envelope, a cold certainty settled in his chest. He would not allow David's arrogance to kill him. Not because David deserved to live, but because Samuel had sworn an oath to save lives. And some oaths transcend the treatment we receive from the people we save. The letter arrived in Seraphina Harding's hands on a quiet Tuesday, delivered discreetly by an anonymous courier. Seraphina, a surgical nursing graduate from Johns Hopkins University, immediately recognized the clinical precision of the language and the seriousness of the observations. Progressive neurological symptoms, impaired motor coordination, episodes of temporal confusion. Each word echoed the concerns she herself had tried to express to her husband over the past few weeks, only to be dismissed with the same disdain he reserved for inferior people. Seraphina knew David was different. The angry outbursts had become more frequent and irrational. He forgot important appointments, repeated the same stories at dinner parties, and his once impeccable handwriting now trembled like that of a much older man. Who could have written this? She wondered, poring over every meticulously documented medical detail. Someone with formal training, definitely. Someone who watches David closely, regularly. Meanwhile, on the 50th floor of Harding Tech, Samuel executed his plan with the precision of a seasoned neurosurgeon. During his cleaning rounds, he had discreetly begun documenting everything. Times of episodes, intensity of tremors, patterns of mental confusion. He had an unexpected ally in a part-time medical insurance consultant named Eleanor, a retired white neurologist who worked in the building next door. Samuel had met her in the parking lot when she commented on recognizing nursing techniques in the way he helped an elderly woman who had stumbled. "You were a doctor," Eleanor had observed, not as a question, but as a fact. For 18 years, Samuel had admitted, waiting for the usual judgment. Instead, Eleanor held out her hand. "Neurologist for 30, and I still recognize competence when I see it." That casual conversation turned into an unlikely partnership. Dr. Eleanor, a 62-year-old white woman who had faced her own battles against prejudice in a male-dominated field, understood immediately when Samuel described David's symptoms. Brain tumor, aneurysm, or something progressive like multiple sclerosis, Eleanor had diagnosed during their conversation at the corner cafe. Any one of those could be fatal if left untreated. "Have you been documenting everything carefully?" Samuel showed her the handwritten notebook where he had meticulously recorded every observation. Eleanor nodded with professional approval. "This man should have been undergoing neurological tests for weeks. His arrogance is going to kill him." Their plan was simple: provide enough evidence for Seraphina to demand a complete neurological evaluation. But David was making it difficult, with his systematic refusal to acknowledge any problem. "My doctor told me I may be working too hard," David had commented to Seraphina over dinner, not realizing he had referred to the dermatologist as if he were his cardiologist. "But I don't trust young doctors. They prefer to diagnose problems that don't exist." Seraphina had exchanged a worried glance with her son, Liam, who was visiting for dinner. Liam, a medical student in his final year, had also noticed the changes in his father. "Dad, when was the last time you had a complete checkup?" Liam had asked delicately. "Checkups are for sick people," David had replied with growing irritation. "I built a tech empire. I think I know when something is wrong with my own body." It was that same week that the most alarming episode occurred. Samuel was organizing the conference room when David walked in, visibly confused. "Where is everyone?" he asked, looking around the empty room. "The meeting was canceled, Mr. Harding. You canceled it yourself yesterday," Samuel replied gently. David stared at him with a blank expression, as if he didn't recognize him, even though Samuel had been cleaning his office every day for 3 years. "Who are you?" he asked, with a mixture of confusion and irritation. "I'm Samuel, from the cleaning staff." "Samuel?" He repeated the name several times, as if trying to access a lost memory. You said something about doctors earlier." For a terrifying moment, Samuel saw in David's dilated pupils the same lost look he had seen in neurological patients during his years in the hospital. The person behind those eyes was gradually disconnecting from reality. "Mr. Harding, are you feeling all right?" he asked, momentarily forgetting his position. The question seemed to snap him back. "I'm fine," he growled, returning to his familiar, hostile personality. "And you're not allowed to ask personal questions. Get back to your work." But Samuel had seen enough. That afternoon he called Eleanor. "Time is running out," he said. "Today he didn't recognize me for several minutes. This isn't just arrogance. It's active neurological deterioration." "Then we need to speed up the plan," Eleanor replied. "I'll call Mrs. Harding directly. As a doctor, I can use professional concern as an excuse." That night, while David slept heavily. Another worrying symptom Seraphina had noticed: she received a call from Eleanor. "Mrs. Harding, this is Dr. Eleanor, a neurologist. I have received some concerning information about your husband's symptoms, and I believe he needs an immediate neurological evaluation." Seraphina held the phone with trembling hands. "Doctor, I've been trying to convince him to seek help, but he refuses to listen." "I understand completely. Unfortunately, it is common for patients with neurological conditions to lose the ability to recognize their own symptoms. This is called anosognosia, a consequence of the disease itself." The conversation lasted 40 minutes. When she hung up, Seraphina had a plan. The next day, she would do something she had never done in 30 years of marriage. She would confront David publicly in front of people whose opinions he valued. She had invited the board of directors to an informal family meeting to discuss the succession of the company, but in reality, it would be a medical intervention in disguise. Samuel, discreetly cleaning the hallway adjacent to the conference room, listened as Seraphina explained the situation to Liam and the directors. "My husband is sick, and his refusal to accept treatment is putting not only his life at risk, but the future of the company." What none of them knew was that in the next 24 hours, David Harding's life would depend entirely on the courage of a cleaning man he had treated as invisible. A man who, despite all the contempt he had received, was about to do something that would define not only his character, but possibly save the life of the man who had humiliated him the most. The family intervention took place on a stormy Thursday, just when David was at his most vulnerable. Seraphina had orchestrated everything with the precision of an experienced nurse. She invited the 5 top executives of Harding Tech to a strategic succession meeting at the family mansion. David descended the stairs, staggering slightly, trying to disguise his compromised coordination with deliberately slow movements. His left side was noticeably weaker, and his speech occasionally slurred at the edges of words. "I don't understand why we need to discuss succession," he muttered to Seraphina as he tried to adjust his tie with trembling fingers. "I'm perfectly capable of running my own company." "Of course you are, dear," Seraphina replied, watching as he tried to tie his tie 3 times before achieving an acceptable knot. "It's just preventive planning." In the boardroom, the directors immediately noticed the changes in David. Jane Morrison, the CFO, exchanged worried glances with Robert Phillips, head of operations, when David referred to the marketing director as that guy from the sales department. David, Eleanor, who Seraphina had invited as a medical consultant for executives, interjected. "I've observed some troubling symptoms during our previous meetings. Tremors, temporal confusion, impaired coordination." "There's nothing wrong with me," David exploded, slamming his fist on the table hard enough to knock over his coffee cup. "I'm tired of unqualified people trying to diagnose me." That was the moment it happened. David tried to stand up to demonstrate his perfect health, but his legs gave out completely. He collapsed into his chair, the left side of his face beginning to twitch involuntarily, his eyes losing focus as he struggled to form words. I don't," he slurred, his right hand shaking violently as he tried to reach for the glass of water. Seraphina immediately dialed 911, but it was Eleanor who took control of the situation. "Acute neurological symptoms, possible stroke or secondary seizure. We need immediate transport to the hospital." While waiting for the ambulance, something unexpected happened. Seraphina received a call from someone she didn't expect. Samuel Wilson. "Mrs. Harding, this is Samuel from your husband's office cleaning crew. I'm calling because I need you to know that I've documented all of his symptoms over the past few weeks." Seraphina nearly dropped the phone. You're a doctor?" "I was, before I was forced to clean offices by people who treat me like I'm invisible." The bitterness in Samuel's voice was palpable, but there was something else: absolute medical competence. Your husband has classic signs of a brain tumor or aneurysm, the progressive symptoms, the cognitive decline, the unilateral tremors. It's all documented in my report." "What report?" "The one I sent to all of his company directors 3 days ago. The same one they ignored because it came from a mere cleaning man." The revelation hit Seraphina like a punch to the stomach. As David was loaded into the ambulance, she realized the full irony. The man her husband had treated with the most contempt was the only person who had tried to save his life. At the hospital, Dr. David Chen's diagnosis confirmed every word Samuel had said: a slow bleeding brain aneurysm causing progressive neurological symptoms. If it weren't for the intervention today, he would have suffered a complete rupture within a few days. Death was almost certain. When David regained consciousness after emergency surgery, his first words were a hoarse whisper. Where is the cleaning man?" Seraphina held his hand, still weak from the sedatives. "Samuel, he's in the hallway, dear. He's been waiting for 6 hours. He tried to warn me? He tried several times." "And you treated him like trash," Seraphina finished. David closed his eyes, tears streaming down his pale cheeks. I need to talk to him." When Samuel entered the room, David could barely hold his gaze. The man he had publicly humiliated stood there, still wearing his cleaning uniform, but carrying a dignity that made David's previous arrogance seem pathetic and small. "You saved my life," he whispered. "I've been trying to save it for weeks. You chose to humiliate me instead." "I know." His voice broke. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But you're right. You don't." Samuel pulled up a chair and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "But I didn't save your life for you. I saved it because I swore an oath to protect lives. And some oaths are bigger than the treatment we receive from the people we save." David's humiliation was just beginning. In the days that followed, the story leaked out in full. The billionaire CEO who nearly died because he was too arrogant to listen to a neurosurgeon turned cleaner who had correctly identified his symptoms weeks earlier. Jane Morrison and Robert Phillips tried to cover up the scandal, but Seraphina had kept copies of all the communications where they ignored and ridiculed Samuel's medical concerns. Recordings of meetings where they suggested firing him for inappropriate behavior went viral on social media. The media turned the case into a national symbol of discrimination in the corporate environment. "Black cleaner saves CEO who looked down on him" became the headline for weeks. The Harding Tech Board of Directors called an emergency meeting. The company lost $400 million in market value in 3 days, and David was forced to step down temporarily as CEO for medical recovery and reflection on human resources policies. But the greatest humiliation came when David learned that Samuel had refused all offers of severance pay and paid interviews. "I don't need anyone's blood money," he told reporters. "I need this to serve as an example. Competence and dignity don't depend on diplomas or skin color." While David recovered from surgery, facing weeks of physical therapy to regain his motor coordination, Samuel quietly returned to his cleaning job. But now, every employee at Harding Tech treated him with the respect he had always deserved. The man who had spent his entire life belittling inferior people had learned in the most humiliating way possible that his life depended on the very people he considered invisible. And the whole world was watching his lesson in humility being served on the national news. 6 months later, Samuel Wilson received the National Hero Award from the Surgeon General of the United States in a ceremony broadcast live across the country. The same cleaning uniform that had been the subject of ridicule was now framed in the National Museum of African American History with a plaque that read, "The uniform of a man who proved that competence has no color." David Harding watched from the front row in a wheelchair he still needed occasionally due to the residual effects of surgery. His hands trembled slightly. no longer from the disease but from the emotion of seeing the man he had humiliated being celebrated as he should have been from the beginning. "Ladies and gentlemen," Samuel said into the microphone, his voice echoing through the packed auditorium. "For 18 years, I was a neurosurgeon. For 6 years, I was treated as if I were invisible. But today, I understand that I never stopped being what I always was. Someone who saves lives, regardless of who recognizes it or not." Harding Tech had been forced to implement drastic changes after the scandal. Jane Morrison and Robert Phillips were fired for discriminatory conduct, and the company created a diversity program that became a national model. Ironically, the company's stock recovered completely after it demonstrated a real commitment to inclusion. Dr. Eleanor, now the medical director of the new Samuel Wilson Institute for Preventive Medicine, smiled from the audience. The institute, funded entirely by a $15 million anonymous donation from David Harding, offered free medical training to people from underserved communities. "When that man told me to stay in my place," Samuel continued, "he didn't know that my place has always been saving lives. He just couldn't see past his own prejudices." David had tried to reach out to him several times during his recovery, but Samuel kept his distance. Not out of anger, but because he understood that some lessons must be lived alone to be truly learned. The public humiliation David faced was devastating, but transformative. He lost friends, social influence, and was forced to confront decades of casual arrogance. But he also gained something he never had: genuine humility and respect for people he had always considered inferior. "Revenge," Samuel concluded, "is not about making someone pay for what they did to us. True revenge is becoming so great that their smallness can no longer reach us." The ovation lasted 8 minutes. David was one of the first people to stand, applauding with tears streaming down his face. Later in the hallway, he finally got a chance to talk briefly with Samuel. "I was an idiot," he said simply. "You were," Samuel agreed without hesitation. "But idiots can learn if they're humble enough. Thank you for saving me, even though I didn't deserve it." "I didn't save you because you deserved it," Samuel replied, adjusting the medal on his chest. "I saved you because some things are bigger than the treatment we receive, and because the best way to overcome prejudice is to prove that our humanity is greater than the cruelty of others." David nodded, knowing he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn the forgiveness he had already received. Today, Samuel runs 3 community hospitals and trains doctors in advanced clinical observation. David has stepped away from business to devote himself entirely to philanthropy, especially medical education programs for minorities. 2 lives were saved that day, one from a brain aneurysm, the other from terminal ignorance. The greatest revenge against those who devalue us is not to destroy them. It is to become so extraordinary that they spend the rest of their lives trying to understand how they could have been so blind. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that our true strength appears exactly when others try to diminish us.